Chapter 40. Having marked the 6th anniversary of Rebecca's passing, Mason leaves the Forks of Brandywine and proceeds north, arriving in New York by way of the Staten Island ferry, the approaching skyline negligible but for a great steeple far to port, belonging to the Trinity Church at the head of Wall Street, where he will attend services on Sunday. But then there is Monday night. The Battery's the spot to be, he is informed by all he meets who know the town. It proves to be a testimonial to desire. For upon a cold night of wind that tears the flames from the torches and sends waves against the sea wall, yet along that lee shore amorous gates, more cautious for the wet footing, go well into the midnight, a parade of needful citizens, faces ever bent to the assault of wind smooth as light. Toward the empty path, the unapproachable shadow, acts never specified. Mason, seeing no point, joins them for a while nonetheless. It all proceeds wordless as a skating party. Presently, he has fallen in with a certain Amelia, a milkmaid of Brooklyn, somehow alone in New York without funds. Here then, you've not eaten. He is correct. At a tavern in Pearl Street, she scoffs down several chops, a platter of roasted potatoes, her bowl of fish chowder and his, before Mason has buttered his bread. A clock strikes the hour. Oh no! They must run to catch the last ferry back to her farm upon Long Island. A bitter-sweet passage. Ferries everywhere upon that cold and cloud-torn Styx. Bells dolefully a-bang in the murk. Strange little gaff-rigged coasters and lighters veering all over the water, stacked high above decks with cargo. A prosperous hell. Amy is dressed from boots to bonnet, all in different articles of black. A curious choice of colour for a milkmaid, it seems to Mason, though, as he has been instructed ever to remind himself, this is New York, where other customs prevail. Oh, I, at home, they're on at me about it without mercy, she tells him. I'm as, but I like black. Yet my uncle, he's as, strangers will take you for I don't know what. Hey, I don't know what either. Do you? How should I? You're a stranger, aren't you? Well, what would you take me for? Days later, riding back to Brandywine through the Jerseys, he will rehearse endlessly whether she said, would you take me, or do you take me, and ways he might have improved upon his actual reply. She does glance back, with an expression he's noted often in his life from women, though never sure what it means. The uncle seems young for one of that designation, his hair ashine with some scented pomade, side whiskers shaved to quite acute angles, his hand ever straying to consult the oversized and far from ornamental dirk he wears in a scabbard upon his belt. With Mason he is genial but guarded. Toward Amy, however, even Mason detects insinuations of reprisal to come. All her funds, even the pennies little Ezekiel gave her to buy him sweets. Oh, Amelia, dear, oh dear. Was she careless? Was that it? Did she look in the window of some English shop and see a frock she fancied? Did one of those awful big city dips fly by and lift her whole bundle, perhaps as an exercise? Is that what happened? Amelia, pronouncing the name with such vexation that Mason faces the inconvenient dilemma of stepping in as a gentleman must, yet on behalf of someone he has crossed a river with under, it now appears, an assumed name. Where is his loyalty presumed to lie? It isn't as if they've been at all, as you'd say, intimate, is it? Fortunately, by this point in his deliberations, Amelia, in a suggestive tone, is murmuring, I know I've been ever so wicked, uncle, but the gentleman has been very kind, causing a redirection of the avuncular gaze upon Mason, for reasons he will grasp only later, when Dixon explains it to him back in camp, with gestures, some of them impatient. We all appreciate a kind gentleman round here, the young man offers, as into the parlour behind him now slide an assortment of rogues, weirder than any Mason has yet seen, be it at Portsmouth or the Cape, or even Lancaster town. Look what Pussy's brought in, leers a half-breed with a braided queue. Brit, by the look of 'em, cries a short, freckled seaman in whom stature and pugnacity enjoy an inverse relation. Long way from home, ain't you, old gloke? Who does your wigs, Cos? There, my lads, think of the impression we must be making, when we ought to be showing our guest that here in Brooklyn we can be as warm and friendly as they are over in New York. We're not country folk, after all. We've seen 'em all manner of traveller, saints and sinners, green and seasoned, some who could teach eels to wriggle, and some who were pure fiduciary edge. And I'll tell you, this one, I don't know. What do you think, Patsy? He's not so easy to read. You've done the ferry boat lurk. You know all the kiddies. What say you? Someone who in different costume might easily be taken for a pirate of the century past gives Mason the up and down. New one on me, Captain. The differently sized eyeballs suggest a life spent peering into small openings. Yet he's not a bum bailiff, nor a bum's assistant. Lacks what you'd call cool disinterest. Amen to that, cries the lewd half-breed. Where would his interests lie, do you think? Oh, it's not Amelia. Where would his interests lie, do you think? Inquires Uncle. Everyone looks at Amelia. Excuse me? I'm supposed to know? I'm sure I was, as ahoy sailor and stuff, she exclaims at last. What's he been peeping into then? The truculent sailor yells. General again is the merriment. I observe the heavens. Mason, seeking through the force of his upward gaze some self-elevation. I am a cadastral surveyor upon a contractual assignment, in a tone inviting a respectful hush. Instead of which, Amelia, squealing in alarm, cad, ass, ew, jumps backward into the not entirely unwelcoming embrace of her uncle, whilst a number of dogs begin to wail, as it seems disappointedly, and a thick-set Irishman, announcing in a pleasant voice, I'll kill him, if you lot would rather not, begins to load his pistol. There, black powder, now put it away. Sir, the lad's confused, hates the English king, and all his subjects as well. Best to tell him you're French. Use an accent, if you can manage it. No, killing him is out of the question, Blackie, for you see, he's the renowned astronomer, Monsieur Mason. Nor am I here to gather the intelligence, as Blackie's eyes narrow thoughtfully. On behalf of anyone, for pity's sake, were it not for your niece. Ah! Pray ye, Captain, I am well into my 37th year. My point exactly. You see how she is, a dewdrop trembling upon the morn of womanly awakening, not yet assaulted by that day you and I know well, let alone savaged, used up, and thrown aside. Quotha! She strikes me as rather a resourceful young woman, independent in her ways. Others would say willful. One day soon, someone will have to ask her to stop wearing black cloth, as it all comes here from England. Yet who among us is eager for that task? They'll hear her across the river. No black cloth, rum little gesture to insist upon. It goes to the heart of this, snarls the half-breed Drogo. All the Brits want us for is to buy their goods. The only use we can be to them is as a herd of animals much like the cow, from whose udders, as from our purses, the contents may be periodically removed. Well, if all we have to withhold from them be a few pitiable coins, then so let us do, hoping others may add to the sum. May add. Mason, squinting into a neutral corner, considers this. Upon the one hand, he has heard highwaymen address travellers they wish to rob in tones less direct. Upon the other, if they are willing to call it a bribe, Mason is certainly willing to discuss the size of it. As it happens, sir, yours may be just the helping hand we need. Be you familiar with any aspect of telescopic repair? Enough not to cause too much damage. In the silence following, everyone but Mason exchanges looks. Oh, he's all right, decides Amy's uncle, whose sobriquet, for few here use Christian names, is Captain Volcano. If he reads the papers, he knows what we are. Sir, when there is light enough, would you mind having a look? The telescope stands in its own windowed observatory at the top of the house. Before it, the edge of the river. Behind it, a green plain strewn with groves and homesteads and stems of smoke and wandering ascent. Their yearnings how like our own. The instrument seems to be pointing down toward the shipyard across the river, commanding a view, in fact, of all the docking along Water Street, and more obliquely of the riverfront down to the Whitehall slip at the south end of the island unto Governor's Island beyond and the Buttermilk Channel. A field marshal's dream. Here, mutters Mason, 'tis designed to be aimed upward, you see, not down for one thing. All the relevant screw adjustments on this model end effectively at the horizon. For, as with our thoughts, to aim downward is to risk, squinting into the eyepiece. Something has knocked these lenses quite out of line. You need to recollimate. How long will it take to fix? You really need a Frenchman for a job like this. That is... Hey, you are a Frenchman, you said. Oui. I meant, of course, I am your man. What tools are there? Not many. The subtle and ingenious Monsieur Mason must unscrew the fastening rings with blacksmith's tongs padded with the remains of a hat which has met with some violent misadventure, almost certainly including fire. Sheep and poultry wander in and out of his atelier. Black powder looks in frequently, brandishing a different weapon each time. Do I make ye twitchy, sir? Capital. Feeling not quite a prisoner, Mason works through the day. From across the river come the sounds of mauls upon pegs, ship fitters' ejaculations, the squeal of lines in sheaves, thuds and far-carrying cries, ships' bells, chandlers' dogs hungry all day, bumboats crying their merchandise. Members of the collectivity climb the ladder, to appearance but curious in a friendly way, and soon the room is full of young men and women in avid disputation. Someone brings up sandwiches, and someone else a bottle, and as night comes down over New York like a farmer's mulch, sprouting seeds of light, some reflected in the river, the company Mason working on in its midst becomes much exercised upon the topic of representation. No taxation. without it. Yes, yes, but Drogo lad, can you not see, even through the Republican fogs which ever hang about these parts, that 'tis all a moot issue, as America has long been perfectly and entirely represented in the House of Commons through the principle of virtual representation? Cries of "Arg!" and "That again!" If this be part of Britain here, then so must be Bengal, for we have taken 'em both from the French. We purchased India many times over with the night of the Black Hole alone, as we have purchased North America with the lives of our own. Are even village idiots taken in more by that empty cant? Mutters the tiny Topman McNoise. No more virtual than virtuous, and no more virtuous than the vilest of that narrow roomful of shoving, beef-faced louts to which you refer, their honour bought and sold many times o'er, that no one bothers more to keep count. Suggest you, sir, even in play, that this giggling rout of poxy half-wits embody us? Embody us? America but some fairy emanation without substance, that hath passed by miracle into them? Damn, I think not. Hell were a better destiny. Why, exclaims the captain, 'tis the doctrine of transubstantiation, which bears to the principle you speak of a curious likeness. That's, of course, considering members of Parliament, like the bread and wine of the Eucharist, to contain, in place of the Spirit of Christ, the will of the people. Then those who gather in parliaments and congresses are no better than ghosts. Or worse, or no worse, Mason cannot resist putting in. If we proceed, that is, to consubstantiation, or the bread and wine, remaining bread and wine, whilst the spiritual presence is revealed in parallel fashion, so to speak, closer to the Parliament we are familiar with here on earth, as whatever they may represent, yet do they remain dismayingly human as well. Everyone stops eating and drinking to stare at him. Parlez-vous? Inquires Blackie. Hey? All respect, sir, 'tis not near as fussy as that. We'd rest content with someone in Parliament along the lines of Mr. Franklin recently in London, someone that side of the herring, looking out for the interests of the province, walking into that Board of Trade. Right then, here I am in person, turning on that damned charm. Aye, an agent for parliamentary business working for us, not some symbol of the people who won't care a rat's whisker about his borough, who will indeed sell out his voters for a chance to grovel his way to even a penny's worth more advantage in the world of global meddling he imagines as reality. Yet representation must extend beyond simple agentry, protests Patsy, unto at least Mr. Garrick, who in representing a role becomes the character, as if by transfer of soul. You want someone to go to London and pretend to be an American who hates stamped paper? Something like that? Send over actor envoys? Stroller plenipotentiaries? Appalling. Not that bad a thought. And consider preachers as well. Mr. Garrick said to envy Whitfield's knack for bringing a congregation to tears simply by pronouncing Mesopotamia. If we'd but had someone there, why, there might be no miserable stamp tax now, until we have someone that can prevent the next such. Why, the Stamp Act is simple tyranny, and our duty's to resist it. Mason expects shocked murmurs at this. That there are none shocks him even more gravely, allowing him a brief, careening glimpse at how far and fast all this may be moving. Something styling itself America coming into being, ripening like a tree full of cherries in a good summer, almost as one stands and watches. Something no one in London, however placed in the web of privilege, however up to the minute, seems to know much about. What is happening? Even playing cards. They want to take a shilling the pack. If your Parliament go ahead with this, we'll have a summer like the world has never seen. Not my Parliament. Mason alertly. Do I take it then that you own no property, wherever 'tis you're from, sir? What rooms in my adult life have not been rented to me, Mason reckons, have been included among the terms of my employment. Then you're a serf, as they call it here, a slave. Sir, I work under contract. Someone owns you, sir. He pays for your meals and lodging. He lends you out to others. What is that called where you come from? Why, and if you are free of such arrangements, Mason shrugs, hurrah thrice over, and perhaps one day you may instruct all the rest of us in how exactly. So we shall. The tone balanced upon a blade's edge between pity and contempt. Mason, not wishing to look into his eyes, carefully scrapes the blacking from around a set screw, then with the worn tip of a hunting knife removes it, a quarter turn at a time. I have had this promise in Philadelphia as well, from coffee house cabals and such. We are in correspondence, says the captain, as are all the provinces, one with another. You may wish to pass that on to London. This is continental, what's happening. Amelia, attached to an avuncular sleeve, is gazing at Mason with new interest. Didn't know you were famous, she murmurs. Working directly for the king, the captain says. Well, I'm as mazed. Alas, no longer. Out in the woods these days, running lines for a couple of lords in a squabble. An exercise in futility. I can't believe you coffins. In a few seasons hence all your work must be left to grow over, never to be redrawn, for in the world that is to come all boundaries shall be erased. You believe Christ's return to be imminent? Mason feigning heartiness. That is surely wonderful news, brother. In my own faith we believe the same, except possibly for the imminent part. Is this worth explaining to him? Drogo asks the captain. Degrees of slavery, sir. Where in England are you from? A mask-dropping sigh. Stroud, God help me. Then you have known it. I have encountered slavery both at the Cape of Good Hope and in America, and 'tis shallow sophistry to compare it with the condition of a British weaver. You've had the pleasure of dragoons in your neighbourhood. They prefer rifle butts to whips. The two hurt differently. What otherwise is the difference in the two forms of regulation? Masters presume themselves better than any who, at their bidding, must contend with the real forces and distances of the world, no matter how good the pay. When weavers try to remedy the inequality by forming associations, the clothiers bring in the infantry to kill, disable, or deliver up to transportation any who be troublesome, these being then easily replaced, and even more cheaply, by others quite happy to labour in silence. Yet slaves are not paid, whereas weavers... Being from Stroud, sir, I think you know how weavers are paid, though Wolfe preferred to settle the pay list with lead and steel, keeping his hand in between glorious victories, thinking he'd use weavers for target practice. Nasty little man, hated Americans, by the way. Contemptible, cowardly dogs who fall down dead in their own shit, I believe was the way he phrased it. Mason recalls well enough the autumn of '56, when the celebrated future martyr of Quebec, with 6 companies of infantry, occupied that unhappy town after wages were all cut in half, and the master weavers began to fiddle the chain on the bar, and a weaver was lucky to earn 2d for 8 hours' work. Mason, in those same weeks, was preparing to leave the Golden Valley to begin his job as Bradley's assistant, even as soldiers were beating citizens and slaughtering sheep for their pleasure, fouling and making sick streams once holy. His father, meantime, cursing his son for a coward, as loaves by the dozen were taken, with no payment but a sergeant's smirk. Mason, seeing the choices, had chosen Bradley and Bradley's world, when he should instead have stood by his father and their small, doomed paradise. Who are they, inquires the Reverend in his daybook, that will send violent young troops against their own people, their mouths ever keeping up the same wary rattle about freedom, toleration, and the rest, whilst their own land is as occupied as ever it was by Rome? These forces look like Englishmen. They were born in England. They speak the language of the people flawlessly. They cheerfully eat jellied eels, joints of mutton, treacle tarts, all that vile, unwholesome diet which maketh the involuntary American more than once bless his exile. Yet their intercourse with the mass of the people is as cold with suspicion and contempt as that of any foreign invader. We shall all of us learn who they are, Captain V, with a melancholy fizz, and all too soon. Wednesday morning. Mason waves goodbye at the dock, where they've come down to the ferry, and Patsy boards with him to see him across, and past the inconveniences of New York. Arrived at last at the Jerseys, Patsy claps him on the shoulder. "We could be at war in another year. What a thought! What a thought, hey?" "I do not enjoy regular luncheon engagements with these people, but I am close enough to tell you this. They will not admit to error. They rely upon colourful madmen and hired bullies to get them through the perilous places, and they blunder on. Beware them." "Thank you, sir. It must have cost you at least a few years of believing otherwise, and I appreciate it. We all do." Coming back down through the Jerseys, Mason and his horse abruptly disjoin. "Met some boys," says the field book entry for Sunday the 24th. "Just come out of a Quaker meeting as if the devil had been with them. I could by no means get my horse by them. I gave the horse a light blow on the head with my whip, which brought him to the ground as if shot dead. I over his head, my hat one way, wig another. Fine sport for the boys." In the foul copy he writes, "For ye devil and the boys," but this does not appear in the fair copies the proprietors will see. All through the Monday he lies in bed, his hip a torment, no position any less painful than another. What had happened? What unforeseen station? What duty neglected? What had his horse boggled at? It being well known that horses may detect spirits invisible to human sensoria. "Mason's strikeover here is of the essence," opines Uncle Ives. "He knows that the boys, released from the silence of the meeting into that exuberance which to soberer spirits is ever a sign of the infernal, yet did not cause his animal's behaviour. What was there? Too much for the horse to remain in the road, that his own sensorium was too coarse or ill-coded to detect. The devil. "Not in this house, Thelma," warns his Uncle Wade. "Pigs are known to smell the wind," remarks Aunt Euphemia, busy at the valves and cocks of the coffee urn. "Saul, who is also Paul, upon his way to Damascus," adds the Reverend, "smit by the glory and voice of the risen Christ, is Christ's in the instant. Many of us long to be taken in the same way. Many are." Recovering from his fall, Mason in fact spends his waking time reading 1 Corinthians, in particular chapter 15, in which Paul's case for resurrection proceeds from human bodies to animal bodies, and thence to bodies celestial and terrestrial, and the glories proper to each, to verse 42, "So also is the resurrection of the dead." "Excuse me," Mason aloud, "so also? I don't see the connection. I never did." "Of course not, dear Maupery. It comes of thinking too much, for there is a point beyond which thought is of little service. It is not Rebecca, not exactly, though it may have been one of those clear little dreams that lead us into the crooked passageways of sleep, though he would insist, as ever to Dixon, that he was not sleeping at the time of the visit. If he does not yet treasure, neither does he cast away these lesser revelations, saving them one by mean, insufficient one, some unbidden, some sought and earned, all gathering in a small pile inside the casket of his hopes against an unknown sum intended to purchase his salvation. End of chapter.